thought about the legal ramifications of this? If anything did ever happen, what the kind of legal exposure would be for scientists or funders if a new virus were created and did get out and did cause substantial economic and human harm? Thank you.
Dr. Mahmood, would you like to answer one of those?
I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to respond to the legal issue.
An epidemic, either naturally caused or intentionally caused, is the most likely thing to cause, say, 10 million excess deaths.
We've been expecting a novel coronavirus to emerge for the last 15 years.
But also there will be a surprise outbreak.
科学院武汉病毒研究所，我叫史正丽。
My question is, have you seen anything at this point that gives you a high degree of confidence that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was the origin of this virus?
Yes, I have.
Mais c'est pas naturel, c'est ce que vous voulez dire?
Non, ce n'est pas naturel, c'était un travail de professionnel, un travail de biologiste moléculaire. C'est un travail très minutieux, on peut dire d'horloger, au niveau des...
Show of hands, has anybody not finished it yet?
We're not going to do classified research.
Largest insurance companies that reinsure other insurance companies, they're experts on risk assessment and they don't like what they see.
An engineered doomsday. This is just one, but as some of you may recall, there was a lot of activity talking about worst case scenarios where the world might be destroyed.
Our Ministry of Health people will do the sampling. We're just here to basically talk to people and have a chance to see the lab.
that you take an existing coronavirus and you make it more infectious and more deadly. Now, why would you ever engage in gain-of-function research? Why would you ever seek to enhance a natural pathogen in this way to make it more deadly and more infectious? Well, the idea of the scientists, when they first discovered that they could do these things easily by using recombinant technology, was this. We're going to create superbugs in the lab, and we're going to figure out how to defeat them. We're going to develop, in theory, we're going to develop vaccines, we're going to develop therapeutic treatments, and so when the real superbug comes on the scene, we will be ready for it. Well, that's all well and good. That's all fun and games until you create a superbug in the lab and it escapes before you have a chance to develop a vaccine or a therapeutic treatment for it.
So what do? We actually, the experimental setup is very simple. We infect the ferret in a cage with an H5N1 virus, and we then simply wait whether this ferret will sneeze or cough or breathe, such that the virus would end up in the ferret in the cage next door. And these ferrets are separated by 2 steel grids that prevent direct contact between the animals, but still allow airflow between the animals to occur freely. These animals are not in an open facility. They are housed in a BSL-3 facility, low-pressure HEPA-filtered room. And in this room, all the experiments are carried out in Class 3 biosafety cabinets and Class 3 isolator units when we do animal experiments. So what did we do? We took an H5N1 virus, and we took a mutated H5N1 virus, and I cannot give you more details about what those mutants are, and we passaged them in ferrets. And then we see whether those viruses become transmissible by aerosol. And we find that the H5N1 wild type does not transmit, so it replicates in the donor ferrets, but not in the recipients. But if we do this with a mutated H5N1 virus, we can see that in 3 out of 4 cases, the virus is transmitted via aerosol or respiratory droplets. We then take this virus from this ferret, from one of these ferrets here, and try to do it again. And indeed, we can now, in 2 out of 2 ferrets, see transmission again. So this is the first time we have worked with an aerosol-transmitted H5N1 virus. That on itself is an important finding, but on top of that, we now know exactly which mutations and which biological traits are necessary for H5N1 bird flu virus to become aerosol transmissible between ferrets. Now these are the main conclusions of our work, and because our paper still hasn't been published, but the press has picked up on our story, there's a lot of misperceptions what you can and cannot conclude from these studies. Now, the first thing that we've heard many times in the press is that this virus would spread like wildfire if it would come out of our facility.
Director of the NIAID, Dr. Tony Fauci.
Specifically, to gain-of-function research on HPAI H5N1. What we're talking about now is the gain-of-function research in studies that increase predominantly the transmissibility, as is the case that I'm going to get into in a moment, as well as pathogenesis and alteration of host range of the virus. Now, the reason we are here today in this room with H5N1, highly pathogenic influenza, and we're not in this room discussing so many of the other gain-of-function research that we do, is because naturally occurring HPAI H5N1 viruses cause a reported almost 60% mortality in humans, which triggered a concern, understandably, clearly, that if you give a gain of function of a pathogenic virus to make it more transmissible, that's a whole different story than some of the other things we faced. let's get down to what happened very briefly. You know historically, and I'm going to go very quickly through the historical perspective that brought us here today. There were studies done by two NIH, NIAID-funded investigators, Ron Fouché and Yoshi Kawaoka, in which H5N1, a strain from Indonesia and a strain from Vietnam, were altered in a gain of function, either by direct mutation or by reassortment. And by passage in ferrets, the mammal model for this virus, for humans, there was an increase in fact, a development of aerosol transmissibility in a mammal, which this particular virus did not have. Because of that, this triggered concern. This was after the experiments had been done and after they had been submitted to the journals. Certainly CDC only funds and conducts gain-of-function research on H5N1 highly pathogenic avian influenza viruses for researchers who are highly trained, skilled, experienced, and adequately regulated.
We've been expecting a novel coronavirus to emerge for the last 15 years. The closest relative to the virus that causes COVID-19 is one that we found in bats in 2013, and there are hundreds of other coronaviruses that are very closely related to this one.
Over to you. I know what you're going to ask.
I apologize. Mine is more of a quick statement. So my name is Ed Yu. I'm from the FBI's Weapons of Mass Destruction Directorate. The comment is that appreciate the theme of today's meeting. It's 100 years after the 1918 influenza pandemic, but it also is 17 years after the anthrax mailings. and wanted to showcase that the whole rationale for the development and the fruition of the Weapons of Mass Destruction Director in the FBI is to protect from the malicious initiation of a pandemic. So, Dr. Fauci, you're famous for saying that the ultimate bioterrorist out there is Mother Nature, and we absolutely recognize that. But the fact of the matter is that the FBI, as a result of what happened, the close call that we had over the years, we worked jointly with the CDC and with the USDA, and on the preventative side have worked with state and local law enforcement, public health, and state veterinary programs to work together in collaboration to rapidly determine that if there's an unusual outbreak of some kind, to determine is this a freak act of nature or are there any indications of an intentional release. And I think that's important to note that that's a unfortunate change or evolution of what we had to, how to address biological threats. And also at the same time, a different rubric of dual use that we don't take into consideration is the charge that the FBI has to protect the types of research that goes on, like Dr. Kaoka's research, and that's another element of security that we need to take into consideration too, that is very valid research, very important research, and how do we protect the people and the institutions that are conducting that work. So again, thank you for the panel, but I just wanted to throw that perspective in.
Thank you.
NIAID has not done and will not do classified research. What's been the thinking on that, and is it looking any different as you're looking to the future?
That is not the mandate of NIH. Our mandate is to do basic and clinical research that adds to the fundamental knowledge that the world can use. So it is completely outside of our mandate to do classified research. Secondly, the whole idea of classified research on the perception of what the NIH is and does is really contrary to that, because when you do classified research, there's automatically a suspicion that somehow there's something maybe nefarious about that. And that's not the space the NIH is in, wants to be in, or ever will be in. So I got to be pretty emphatic about that. We're not going to do classified research.
Around SARS, we focused on SARS. Coronavirus emerged from a wildlife market and was the first pandemic of this century. So it's a big event. So we started to trace back from the wildlife market which species carried the virus that came into those markets. We found that it was bats, not civets was the original idea.
Right.
So then we started looking, where did they come from? And we went out to southern China and did surveillance of bats across southern China. And we've now found, after 6 or 7 years of doing this, over 100 new SARS-related coronaviruses, very close to SARS. Some of them get into human cells in the lab. Some of them can cause SARS disease in humanized mouse models and are untreatable with therapeutic monoclonals, and you can't vaccinate against them with the vaccine. So these are a clear and present danger.
Yeah.
We've even found people with antibodies in Yunnan to SARS-related coronaviruses. So there's a human exposure. Very close to SARS. Some of them get into human cells in the lab. Some of them can cause SARS disease in humanized mouse models and are untreatable with therapeutic monoclonals, and you can't vaccinate against them with the vaccine. the lab. Some of them can cause SARS disease in humanized mouse models and are untreatable with therapeutic monoclonals, and you can't vaccinate against the vaccine. Some of them can cause SARS disease in humans.
And we're taking things that are, genetically modified organisms, and we're injecting them in little kids' arms. We just shoot them right into the vein. We also face a new threat that the next epidemic has a good chance of originating on a computer screen of a terrorist intent on using genetic engineering to create a synthetic version of the smallpox virus or a contagious and highly deadly strain of flu. Epidemiologists showed through their models that a respiratory spread pathogen would kill more than 30 million people in less than a year. And there is a reasonable probability of that taking place in the years ahead.
Alton. We feel that the issue of liability, that insufficient attention has been given to the issue of liability. The organizers of the Asilomar conference 35 years ago made sure that there were lawyers participating in that meeting, which led, as we all know, to guidelines for recombinant technology. There is another community that I think should be involved, that we think should be involved, and that is the insurance companies. The insurers don't like what they're seeing, and they don't like where this is going. And in particular, the largest insurance companies that reinsure other insurance companies, they're experts on risk assessment, and they don't like what they see. We understand there have been secret meetings in London at Lloyd's of the reinsurers. How are we going to reassure, even with the most stringent biosafety rules and procedures, how on earth are we going to how are we going to reassure the insurance companies? I mean, we're seeing premiums going up already. How are we going to reassure them that this is safe?
Anyone like to come? Ron?
I would like to point out that this issue that you're raising and has been raised earlier is not related to H5N1 gain-of-function research. This is an issue that is much, much bigger. There are hundreds of labs in the world that possess SARS. There are hundreds of labs in the world that possess other dangerous viruses. This issue is not related to H5N1 gain-of-function research at all. And we've seen many discussions come up from the public and from the press asking questions about this research that's really not only related to H5N1. And so these are really, really good questions, and they should be handled at some point, but I do not think this is the right time because it's not specific for H5N1 gain-of-function research.
do you think that there are questions related to the science of viruses that we should not ask? Or do you think that everything can be safeguarded one way or the other so that science is just open for investigating whatever can be asked about either viruses or any other aspects?
So the system of trying to have some sort of oversight over what experiments should not be done is much better today in 2018 than it was several years ago when it was just very loosey-goosey, as it were. We used to have some oversight, but not. And it was usually after the fact, which was very awkward, where someone would do an experiment, get funded for an experiment, and then get ready to publish it, submit it to a journal, and then the journal editors would go, should we be publishing this? Which it's very tough to stop something from being published that's already been done and that's out there. So the system now, at least for work that's funded by the federal government, the one thing that people don't understand is that if you're not federally funded, the government has no control over what somebody can do and what can't do. And the big argument now, not argument, but the big focus that often gets misinterpreted is gain of function. In other words, if you want to anticipate, and Yoshi is one of the world's experts in not only the quality of his work, but the aggravation that he causes me all the time. Not really aggravation. But what happens is that the work that he does is really elegant. And when he asks questions of what would be the mutations that might change the way a virus acts, when those mutations are already occurring in nature, the fact that he wants to study it, we often question, should he be studying it? And every time we've done that, the conclusion has been yes, as a matter of fact. And he had recently has one that we reviewed, that we put it through a very formal type of review, and it was clear that this risk-benefit was for the benefit of society. There are experiments that even common sense tells you you shouldn't do. Should we get a microbe that is absolutely not spread by a respiratory route, and should we make it a respiratory route virus? That's different than one that classically does spread through respiratory route efficiently or inefficiently, and we're trying to find out what the amino acid sequences and the mutations are that make it go one way or the other. That's different than trying to create something that would never happen in nature. And that's the one that should never be done.
Dr. Zhang Chu has been recognized by the Governor General's Innovation Awards.
This work can't be done without teamwork.
She and the team at the National Microbiology Lab have been praised for developing an Ebola vaccine. But just over a week ago, Chu, her husband, and her students from China were evicted from Canada's only Level 4 lab, their security access revoked. Staff at the lab was told last Monday the couple is on leave and not to communicate with them.
We're getting this from sources who work at the lab, but who don't want to be identified for fears they'll be punished. They say this is coming just months after IT specialists entered Chu's office after hours and replaced her computer, and her superiors stopped authorizing work trips to China.
We're here today to announce 3 separate cases highlighting the ongoing threat posed by Chinese economic espionage and research theft in the United States. The complaint alleges that Dr. Lieber signed a contract with the Chinese university in Wuhan and was paid up to $50,000 per month, plus up to $158,000 in living expenses. Failed to mention on her visa application that she is also a lieutenant with the People's Liberation Army. For trying to smuggle vials of biological material out of the United States to China and lying about it to federal investigators.
I would like to ask the panel members if they think that the escape of SARS in 2003 and the escape of H1N1 from a lab, if that's where it occurred in 1977, are really good comparators to escape of H5N1, which is in the United States a select agent pathogen and worked on in very specific conditions. Thank you.
To provide anecdotes in a discussion otherwise that has not raised risk at all, almost, of the possibility of accidents even from high biocontainment labs, at least in the case of SARS. I think the work that's gone on to now with gain-of-function work, the work that has been published, has been done in really very high-level labs with good records. I haven't heard any discussion yet about the rules of the road going forward, whether there would be some set of criteria to limit those labs going forward, whether it should be done in all places that now do vaccine candidate development around the world, what those rules would be. So it's hard to make a direct comparison worldwide, but I do think it's important because of the fallibility of human systems. We have systems that are designed as best we can design them, but I don't think any of them are foolproof.
The issue of pandemic preparedness, and if there's one message that I want to leave with you today based on my experience, and you'll see that in a moment, is that there is no question that there will be a challenge to the coming administration in the arena of infectious diseases, both chronic infectious diseases in the sense of already ongoing disease, and we have certainly a large burden of that, but also there will be a surprise outbreak. It is not going to go away. So the thing we're extraordinarily confident about is that we are going to see this.
Par-dessus, ajouter des séquences notamment du VIH, le virus du sida.
Mais quand vous dites on a ajouté, qui a ajouté?
Moi, je ne sais pas.
Mais c'est pas naturel, c'est ce que vous voulez dire?
Non, ce n'est pas naturel. C'était un travail de professionnel, un travail de biologiste moléculaire. C'est un travail très minutieux, on peut dire d'horloger, on peut dire au niveau des séquences.
Mais dans quel but?
Dans quel but, ça, ce n'est pas clair. Moi, j'expose, si vous voulez, mon travail, c'est d'exposer les faits, c'est tout. Je n'accuse personne, je ne sais pas qui a fait ça et pourquoi. La possibilité, c'est peut-être que ils ont voulu faire, on ne sait pas, on a voulu faire un vaccin contre le sida. Donc on a pris des petites séquences du virus et on les a installées dans la séquence plus grande du coronavirus.
Alors, je suis pas sûr de comprendre tout ce que vous dites. C'est-à-dire que dans ce virus,
il y a une part de VIH?
Voilà, c'est ça. Le matériel génétique du virus est un long ruban d'ARN, n'est-ce pas? Comme de l'ADN, mais c'est de l'ARN. Et dans ce long ruban, à une certaine place, on a fixé des séquences petites de VIH. Et ces séquences petites ne sont pas petites pour ne rien vouloir dire. Elles ont la possibilité de modifier, par exemple, ce qu'on appelle des sites antigéniques. C'est-à-dire, si on veut faire un vaccin, on peut très bien modifier la protéine qui est exposée pour le vaccin par une petite séquence venant d'un autre virus.
Mais vous êtes certain de ça? Parce qu'on a dit que le bruit a couru, que c'était d'une origine humaine, finalement. Et ça a été ensuite réfuté par la plupart des autorités scientifiques, quand même.
Il y a quand même une volonté d'étouffement, si vous voulez. Les travaux, nous ne sommes pas les premiers. Un groupe de chercheurs indiens, très renommés, avait publié la même chose. On les a forcés à rétracter.
And integral to that study has always been the issue of gain of function research, not only for influenza, but essentially for all infectious diseases research. Now, there are a few ways to look at gain of function research. There's the naturally occurring mutations which naturally give gain of function, and investigators study these effects on the phenotypes of interest. Does this mutation make something more transmissible, more pathogenic, or adapt to host better? Or, what historically investigators have done is to actually create gain of function by making mutations, passage adaptation, or other newer genetic techniques such as reverse genetics and genetic reassortment. When we do that, often some phenotypes appear and others disappear. For example, it is commonly seen that when you increase a transmissibility, you may see a decrease in pathogenesis, or vice versa. You may deliberately increase pathogenesis and see a decrease in transmissibility. But the bottom line is that gain and loss of function research is critical to understanding disease pathogenesis, antimicrobial resistance, and host responses, as well as to developing better techniques of surveillance, vaccines, and therapeutics.
It's alive. Oh, it's alive. It's alive. It's alive. It's alive.
The NSABB recommended that the general conclusions highlighting the novel outcome be published, but the manuscript did not include methodologic and other details that could enable replication of the experiments by those who would seek to do harm, what also was discussed that might accidentally be released, so it is not just people who would deliberately do harm. As Sally mentioned, following that, there was an explosion of reaction, sometimes bordering on the very extreme, as shown by this editorial from the New York Times, an engineered doomsday.
Anybody not finished it yet? The only reason I say this is it's going to get really weird when everybody gets off the plane and you cannot. Because you have to have that in order to leave this airplane.
Institute of Virology has come under scrutiny as a potential source of the virus. According to an NBC report, a hazardous event may have happened at the lab in October last year. 3 people familiar with the matter told NBC that U.S. intelligence agencies are reviewing an unofficial report on cell phone location data. The report found there was no cell phone activity around the high security part of the P4 lab between October 7th and 24th last year. The report suggests there may have been a hazardous event there sometime between October 6th and 11th that required the lab to be closed during that time. The report talks about images from October 14th to 19th last year showing no outbound traffic from the lab. It suspected a roadblock was set up to prevent cars and people coming and going. This is in contrast to satellite images from August to October 6th, which show a lot of activity. The next instance of activity was on October 25th. U.S. Senator Tom Cotton also spoke about the data in an interview with Fox News. Cotton said normally thousands of mobile phones are in use around this area. Wuhan has about the same population density as New York. He adds the sudden drop in cell phone usage is likely an indicator of when the virus first began spreading. He said we could get to the bottom of it a lot faster if the Chinese regime was more transparent.
concern was that the products or information that were generated by these experiments might be used by others in a way that could harm society, either carelessly, in an unregulated fashion, by inexperienced people, or even by deliberate misuse. So really the fundamental question with regard to our involvement is, and the discussion in general, is the issue is the risk to global health of the work that we fund, the risk of not funding that research.
The second question, just very briefly, is has anybody thought about the legal ramifications of this? If anything did ever happen, what the kind of legal exposure would be for scientists or funders if a new virus were created and did get out and did cause substantial economic and human harm. Thank you.
Dr. Mahmood, would you like to answer one of those?
I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to respond to the legal issue.
Do you have any comments about this in terms of being in an area where the risk, translating the risk to your location?
I'm sorry, it doesn't.
Okay. Any other? Yes.
I thought those were both very important questions, and I think it's not only a legal question, it's an ethical question. That's the reason why I said before that I feel like for this community to proceed, this isn't a panel about risks, it's mostly about benefits. But if this community is to proceed with this research, I think we need to have a common understanding about the high side risks. And if we do, it would give me a little bit more sense, a little bit more confidence that we're proceeding in the same way. But I don't feel like we have convergence on risk. We have a lot of discussion about benefit. Maybe we'll find out later today that we all agree on the risks, but I don't think that's the case.
I'm not a lawyer either, but I will move into some uncharted territories here and say that what I worry about with some of this is that much of the explosion in biotechnology today is such that it is happening well before laws and regulations and policies and best practices have been established. And so I do worry a little that we wouldn't be able to do any prosecution if there was something nefarious because we have not put in place the superstructure, if you will.
I think an epidemic, either naturally caused or intentionally caused, is the most likely thing to cause, say, 10 million excess deaths. I think an epidemic, either naturally caused or intentionally caused, is the most likely thing to cause, say, 10 million excess deaths. I think an epidemic, either naturally caused or...
My question is, have you seen anything at this point that gives you a high degree of confidence that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was the origin of this virus?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have. And I think that the World Health Organization should be ashamed of themselves because they're like the public relations agency for China. And this country pays them almost $500 million a year.
months, perhaps years ago. A new coronavirus spread silently within herds. Gradually, farmers started getting sick. Infected people got a respiratory illness with symptoms ranging from mild flu-like signs to severe pneumonia. The sickest required intensive care. Many died. Experts agree unless it is quickly controlled, it could lead to a severe pandemic, an outbreak that circles the globe and affects people everywhere.
fly 600 miles from its cave dwelling in another province to the city of Wuhan and land in someone's soup. Everybody now agrees, except for a few marginals, that it escaped from a so-called high containment laboratory. I have to chuckle when I say high containment because obviously it failed at what it was supposed to do. It wasn't level 4, it was operating at level 2. But, now the question becomes, was it a naturally occurring horseshoe bat coronavirus that was isolated in the Wuhan Institute of Virology and then accidentally escaped from the lab by infecting a lab worker? Or was it a virus that the researchers there were working on using gain-of-function technology? Gain-of-function means that you take an existing coronavirus and you make it more infectious and more deadly. Now, why would you ever engage in gain-of-function research? Why would you ever seek to enhance a natural pathogen in this way to make it more deadly and more infectious? Well, the idea of the scientists, when they first discovered that they could do these things easily by using recombinant technology, was this. We're going to create superbugs in the lab, and we're going to figure out how to defeat them. We're going to develop in theory, we're going to develop vaccines, we're going to develop therapeutic treatments, and so when the real superbug comes on the scene, we will be ready for it. Well, that's all well and good. That's all fun and games until you create a superbug in the lab and it escapes before you have a chance to develop a vaccine or therapeutic treatment for it. Now, I'm not saying that's what happened in this case, and I'm not saying this is a bioweapon. Quit changing the subject, which is what the other side loves to do.
Exactly.
I'm just saying, was it tinkered on in the lab? And we know that the lab director at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, who was their team leader for virology research, was a woman named Dr. Shi, full Chinese name, Dr. Shi Zhangli, who has been using gain-of-function research for years to create new, more deadly, and more infectious coronaviruses. So Dr. Shi needs to tell us what she was doing and how she was doing it. The Chinese Communist